There's studies that compare testicle size of different civilizations and different cultures.
Yeah, so there's a lot of argument about this. And the problem is that the principle...
That it's racist.
It's racist, right? That's what underlies a lot of it, is that you end up with ethnic differences in testicle size, which we know exist. The ethnic differences in testicles, I believe, but I can't promise you that it's some different West African groups happen to have the largest testicle size on average. And so we have this idea of race as if it has genetic meaning, and it doesn't. But ethnicity does have genetic meaning, right? Mm-hmm. So an ethnic group evolved in a very certain spot to deal with very certain problems, and their body shape will vary. You've got these West Africans who are really jacked with these big, a lot of quick jerk musculature. You don't see that over on East Africa very much.
I'm Chris Grandison. Welcome to my channel, Xenogenesis, where I apply evolutionary psychology to Black community issues. Now, if you want to know why Black men cannot be given social equality, watch this video to the end so you get all the evidence. So in this video, I clipped some parts of a lecture I gave on this subject of the physical aspects of Black masculinity that explains the evolutionary reasoning why we are on average perceived as threatening and more physically formidable. In fact, in evolutionary psychology, they would call it our response to testosterone-linked morphological traits. So this is like, how broad your shoulders are, how deep your voice is, how much upper body muscle you're carrying, even on the shape of your skull, how prominent are your brow ridges. Because we seem to be attuned and pay attention to these features of our body that show how strong or weak the action of testosterone has been on our development. So I want to show evidence of how this does affect the thoughts and behavior of people observing Black men. And most importantly, the psychological machinery this engages in people's minds that contextually shapes their social responses to Black men. Now, these clips will have studies included, and I'll put those studies in the description as well, so you can read this information firsthand for yourself.
One of the strong findings across psychology now, this isn't, just evolutionary psychology. This is lots of different forms of psychology. Find over and over again, Black people, Black men are perceived as being more masculine. At that point, you can take the racial context and move it to the side and just say, how do human beings respond to higher levels of masculinity, whether it's within their own group or high, strong masculinity in members of outgroups? How do human beings respond to that? How do they even perceive strong masculinity? So there's a perception of potential for aggression, violence, and physical dominance. So when they perceive that means there's a threat when it's in an in-group of being dominated by another group, because they're displaying this higher level of an ability to physically dominate. And for whatever reason, although I do think I know the reasons, but it's a very strong finding that perceive Black men as being more masculine. And when you add the cultural learning on top of that, so the ethnic stereotypes around Black males as well, the two together, it just causes white male police officers to be quicker to want to use force against Black men and to use a higher level of force against Black men. And I found this across the United Kingdom and in the United States, multiple lines of evidence, whether it's psychological, whether it's something like here in this report from the Greater Manchester Police Achieving Race Equality report. When they talk about use of force on Black men, this is what they kept finding in those reports from white officers, that they would talk about the physique of Black men, and they're less likely to do that with any other kind of men, white men or whatever. Where there's a negative psychological response to, let's say, Black men or Black people from law enforcement. Now, one study that may support something like that is this 2010 study, where they found white perceivers for whom self-protection goals are highly salient, and of course that's going to be the case with police officers. They erroneously see anger but not other negative emotions in the neutrally expressive faces of Black men. So they're not expressing any anger, but the white perceivers whose self-protection goals are salient, they are seeing anger in that face. But in the same research, they're not seeing that in the faces of white men or women or the faces of even Black women. So it wasn't just straight up racial. Now this would take us back to the first lecture with the race as a social construct. And I talked about the testosterone morphologically linked traits and how we respond to strong masculinity, what we associate with it, this reaction would fit right in with that kind of research. But a negative psychological response from police officers to Black men is going to mean, I'm going to be more likely to pull you over. I'm going to be more likely to want to search you. I'm going to be more likely to suspect you of something. And once you have that, once they're now stopping you, now it's just mathematics. I'm more likely to find something wrong if I'm more likely to stop and search you at a high level compared to other groups of people. And that leads to higher levels of criminalization.
Now, this view of Black people being more masculine and formidable, it's not a Western thing. It's not just based on stereotypes that exist in Western civilization. It is global. And you can see in these two clips that I've got for you.
外国人の羨ましいところとか、なんか外国の羨ましいところってあったりします？
なんか骨格がしっかりしてて、僕も筋トレしてるんですけど、なんか筋肉つきやすそうで羨ましいなと思ってて。
特に多分黒人の方は
そ
多分そうですよね。
腕とか。
觉得美国人啊，就是身体的那种结构比较好，像那种黑人啊，那种人高的人，肌肉都很好，所以。
That was an elite Chinese gymnast in 2015 giving an interview to The Economist. And, you know, he stated, the Americans have better physicality, especially the Black athletes who are taller and more muscular. That is a clear example of a perception of higher physical masculinity in Black males. This is common in East Asia. You know, I lived in East Asia for about 3 years. And they will tell you openly how they feel about Black people. And a lot of it is just about how physically robust and strong they perceive us to be. Now, a few weeks back, I made that video based on what Jeff St. James of the Ask a Brother podcast stated about the global racial desirability rankings, where white men were at the top, Black men second, Latino men third, and Asian men fourth. And then on the women's side, it was either white or Asian women on the top, Latino women with Black women on the bottom. And I stated, you know, what we found in many studies. Psychologist Dr. Philip Atiba Goff is a Black psychologist in America who does a lot of work with police departments on excessive use of force on Black people. And in a 2008 study, him and his colleagues stated perceivers held a strong association between Blackness and masculinity. Based on that, several people have wanted to know, well, okay, why are we perceived as more masculine? I never really answered that question. To be honest, I didn't really want to, because you're not going to like those answers. I don't like those answers, but I'm going to answer it because you should know it does play a significant role in how Black people perceived and how people interact with us. Because you have to think, what does masculinity, particularly higher average levels of masculinity, represent to the human mind? How do our brains process strong masculinity? This isn't really about being Black. This is about what human beings have done with strong masculinity over time. They've used it to boss shit and take shit and dominate shit and conquer shit. And if they're perceiving us from a physical point of view of being more masculine, then there's always going to be that concern, that fear around Black masculinity. Now, the clip that started this video, that was evolutionary psychologist William von Hippel on the Joe Rogan podcast some years back, speaking about differences in physical masculinity between ethnic groups. That's one of the examples of how there can be significant difference, physically speaking, in things associated with masculinity.
What William von Hippel was talking about is related to this. There are ethnic differences in sensitivity to testosterone, which is linked to morphological features. And so because they differ by ethnicity, you can have more pronounced, you know, physical features of masculinity between populations, producing, you know, some of what he was talking about. So he talked about how the West African guys would be bigger in comparison to some of the East African guys. Now, because testosterone sensitivity differs between ethnic groups, I just want to take a second to explain it. So what you're looking at here are these CAG repeat numbers. The lower the number, the more sensitive your body is to testosterone. And these are averages by population. So I put WA in front of black to show that the tests have been done on West African blacks mainly, or West African descended blacks, I should say. And then you see the white average is 21 and the Asian average is 23. So the lower the number, the more efficient and sensitive your body is to processing testosterone, producing these effects of masculinization. And this is just a bit of support for that. So you see the AR there is the androgen receptor, and the CAG is showing the number of repeats. So again, the lower the number, the more sensitive the body is to testosterone. So in this study here done in 2012, you'll see that Afro-Caribbeans had the shortest number, Caucasian and Hispanics a bit higher, and then East Asians were the highest.
Now, to support, what you just saw in that clip, I'm going to give you some evidence from the Center for Disease Control. They stated, in general, across nationally representative and convenient samples, Black adults are more muscular and stronger than whites, who are more muscular and stronger than Asians. That's not stereotype. That's not social construction. That's hard evidence. So that's a clear statement from them. Blacks have a higher level of maleness. And again, this is from the CDC. This is not, from some Mickey Mouse outfit. And this starts in utero. Black babies are exposed to higher levels of testosterone in utero. Many of you already know something about the relationship between black males and testosterone. But what I will present here is the evolutionary psychology behind the human brain's processing of information related to physical masculinity, meaning how do we respond to these testosterone-linked morphological features of the human body, because our brain pays strong attention to these features. Masculine faces, meaning, faces that show testosterone-linked morphological features, like prominent brow ridges and, being short and broad. Cross-culturally, they're perceived as belonging to people you do not want to mess with. These masculinity cues represent the potential for various forms of dominance, violent social competition, and threats to the status of rivals and the ability to acquire and control resources. Collectively, these masculinity cues are perceived as threat-provoking physical features, as you see listed here. And they are indicators of the formidability of the male. That's what they look like to the human brain. And one of the top evolutionary researchers on formidability is evolutionary psychologist Aaron Sell. And in his 2009 paper, along with his colleagues, leader Cosmides and John Tooby, he stated, one of the key variables governing social interactions in species like humans should be formidability. It is increasingly looking like deep male voices weren't really about attracting women. It was much more about intimidating men to outcompete them for the women. Deep voices are one of the main testosterone-linked features that our psychology tends to note and respond to. And researchers found that people can estimate the physical formidability of a man just by listening to his voice over the phone. A deep voice is a strong indicator of the threat potential of a male. So let me list what goes along with having higher levels of physical masculinity. It gives men a social presence. Let's call that, social dominance. People are attuned and pay a bit more attention to socially dominant men. It gives them a greater ability to compete with other men, meaning their intersectional competitiveness, it's going to perceive to be stronger, and it tends to be stronger because how the human brain responds to strong masculinity. Also, those types of men can be more confrontative. Confrontative men tend to be attractive to women because they see those men being confrontational with other men as an aspect of being this socially dominant, superior man. And if that man is tied to them, then he can dominate others on their behalf. And this is why they find that attractive. Now, with regard to physical attractiveness, strong masculinity is perceived as offering genetic benefits to women, as in, if they choose to reproduce with a man like that, then, they're going to have, strong, healthy children. Now, when masculine men are members of outgroups, which black men are, many non-black women will not see them as attractive. They will see them as dangerous. So do you really want to give social equality to a group of men with those traits? You can't restrict them genetically or biologically, but socioeconomically, you can hold down a group of men like that by using, the political, legal, and economic institutions of your society to restrict them.
Documented evidence of widespread acts of discrimination against Black Americans that have put them at a disadvantage in just about every economically significant domain of life. That's textbook neo-group selection. I'm economically selecting against you, I'm restricting you, I'm harming you, I'm not helping you, I'm less likely to do anything for you that's going to economically help you out.
So if you can control cultural institutions and have that structural power, you don't need to be as physically masculine as the other group of men, because you can hold them down socially. And given that status is a significant part of how women choose their partners, you attack the other group of men through their status. You restrict it, hold it down, you dirty up their reputation, and this will reduce their ability to challenge you in intersectional competition. So when, Jeff St. James was saying in those global desirability rankings that black men are second to white men, that's why they're second to white men. Because black male status, their socioeconomic ranking, you can restrict that, even though they're perceived as being more masculine than white men. You hold down the status, it just plays too strong a role in mate selection. Now, here in this clip, you're going to see how prevalent these views of black men are from the research and from some anecdotal stuff as well.
So with this study done about 12 years ago, when asked to categorize voice recordings with a high degree of masculinity, the deeper the voice was, the more likely white participants were to perceive those voices as coming from black men. And furthermore, they had another part of the study, they had the men would wear these bodysuits, and there'll be sensors on the bodysuits, and then they would track them walking. So what they would do is computerize that and show the participants of the study the figures walking, but as points of light. So you can't tell anyone's race, you can just tell it's a human figure walking, and you're looking at points of light. It's like that body capture stuff they do for science fiction movies like Avatar and so on. So the more masculine the style of walking was, the more likely they also were to perceive that walker as being a black male. So what you're really looking at here is the perception of strong masculinity is being more associated with black people and black males in particular. And in cross-cultural studies, we've seen that masculine voices, evoke these perceptions of dominance or formidability, physical prowess and things like that. So when you have these perceptions, they can now shape, how you interact with people, the social environment. Because if you're perceiving someone as being more dominant and having more physical prowess, you're thinking now like this. So if I pause for a second, now how quickly did it take for you to perceive one dog as a lot more physically formidable than the other one? If you were to walk into a park, and see these two dogs off the leash, which one would you immediately be much more concerned about? It would be the Rottweiler there, because you can see it's a much more formidable dog, and you might know the dog, that it has a fierce reputation. So you have, what you physically perceive mixing with reputation and cultural perceptions of both of these dogs. Well, humans don't just do this with dogs, we do this with each other. So we perceive humans as being more or less or formidable, not just individually, but also in our social groupings, and certainly by ethnic group. So one of the ways we've been finding this out is by using what this young man is wearing on his head. These glasses are eye tracking software, and when you're wearing it, it tracks what people look at when they initially meet you, what parts of their body they seem to selectively pay attention to. And in men, we found that they selectively pay attention to testosterone-linked morphological traits. So they'll look at how wide your shoulders are, upper body muscle around your chest area. And we found that they do this automatically, pretty much always. Now, women can do it, but they don't do it as much as men do. Men tend to do it because men compete against each other. And because women don't really compete against men, they don't do it as much. A lot of the women will look in a man's eyes as opposed to this formidable area of the upper body. However, in the test, when they are actually asking men and women to compare, different men who are different sizes and so forth, both the men and the women are very accurate at estimating like the strength of that male, how formidable he appears to be. But it's kind of odd because when they ask men and women to do this with women, they're not very good at estimating the strength of women. So the reason women don't tend to be good at assessing it of other women is because really men have been the violent, aggressive problem women have had to face throughout our evolution. There isn't a long history of women forming large groups and fighting and killing each other, but men just kill everybody. They kill other men, they kill women. So women have actually had to be really good at estimating the strength of males as well. But the fact that we do this automatically, very quickly, and then we use this as social information that influences our behavior. And this is based on also on ethnic differences between groups. So this was an article written by an Asian researcher about 10 years ago on ethnic differences of testosterone in men. I wanted to use some of the social information he gave us because he kind of backs up what we've seen in the science studies. So his comment here, if you live in a diverse country, you've probably noticed these variations in body structure between ethnic groups. And then he goes on to say, stating his observations bluntly, Black people on average seem to be more muscular than the norm, while Asians are, less muscular than the norm. And by their absence, he's saying white guys are like the norm, they're in the middle, which would line up with the studies on differences in testosterone sensitivity by ethnic group. Now, what he said here is, an assessment of these different groups by, their physical prowess. So I wanted to show how socially we all notice these things, but as Carol Hooven put in her book here, it does affect the social environment because possessing these physical traits, either to less or a more pronounced degree, it profoundly affects social interactions. And we see this here again. This was a private conversation that was recorded from the French national team coach about 10 years ago. So he was concerned about the amount of Black players in the youth academies playing football. And because he felt the academies were choosing, big, strong athletic players, and this was resulting in too many Black players in these academies. But if you look at the comment he makes, they have the impression they really train the same prototype of players, big, strong, and powerful. But what is there that's currently big, strong, and powerful? The Blacks. That's the way it is. It's a current fact. God knows that in the training centers and football schools, there are loads of them. Now, he didn't know he was being recorded, but this leaked out, caused a bit of a scandal. But there's a lot we could break down in this statement. First of all, these are French players. These are young French players. He's the French national team coach. So he's actually supposed to be excited and happy that he has these assets for his team. But he's actually, the team he's really concerned about is the white team, because he's not speaking very positively about all these players that he has access to. He wants them to be more white players. So he's really talking about a different tribe here, and he's perceiving them negatively. The fact that they're big, strong, and powerful, but they're not white. But what he has given us is a physical formidability assessment of Black human beings. And more importantly, he's given us these 2 points. He's perceiving these young Black men as competition when they're actually on his team. And if we're being perceived more physically formidable, then what does that do with regard to the psychological machinery that you will engage now if you're perceiving us as competition and you're perceiving us as more physical, more powerful than you are?
I call this a black blind spot because we don't tend to see other races as being physically intimidating. As the evidence is shown above, that's not the way other races see us. And as a consequence, we don't fully understand their reactions to our physiology because we don't feel and experience the same reaction to their physiology as they do toward ours. Now, does this really seem like a population of men you want to go head up against for the championship? You don't want that smoke, man. So what you want to do is restrict a population of men who possess this high level of physical masculinity. Now, there's nothing you can do about black biology. You can't hold down the physical masculinity of black men, the higher average levels of that physical masculinity. So what you want to do is hold them down socially. You want to attack their status. You want to restrict them educationally. You want to restrict them in the labor market. You want to restrict them anywhere you can socially and economically. And that's exactly how you do it. You restrict their economic attractiveness. You want to make sure that there's stigma and poor reputations on them as a group, because if you match how masculine they're perceived to be with a good social reputation, that's a group of men who are going to outcompete you. They will have the ability in intersectional competition to win, because masculinity comes with all kinds of benefits. The adaptive option would be to deny these rivals social equality and maintain the edge your tribe has over them. But now, how do they restrict this population of black men in the modern world? Well, some evolutionary psychologists have written about this. You want to keep their socioeconomic position lower. And evolutionary scientists call this form of male intersexual competitiveness, of using human institutions this way, structural violence. This clip shows how structural violence is being used against black men right now in the modern world.
I think racial mass incarceration was what we would call in evolutionary studies an adaptive countermeasure. What Jim Crow did is lock the black population into an inferior position by law and social practices. Now, with that gone, you need another dominant strategy. How am I going to lock them into a lower social ranking without the overt official system we had? And racial mass incarceration was better than the previous strategy. It's beautiful, it's elegant in how it operates. In evolution, we have this term called a cost-inflicting strategy. And this is a behavioral strategy practiced by organisms towards other members of its own species to restrict and harm the ability of their competitors to challenge them. And humans pursue these strategies naturally. And when I say naturally, I mean they'll do it unconsciously and consciously. It's a cost-inflicting strategy. It's something you do to your rival to restrict their ability to challenge you for this thing you're both trying to get. Now, this is species typical behavior. You will see this amongst ethnic groups of the same race in other parts of the globe, in Asia or Africa and so on. You will see the same behavior pattern. But this is exactly what he was talking about. A coalitional situation where it seems advantageous to try and keep members of other groups in a lower status position with distinctly worse outcomes. Now, I'm not, the only evolutionist to notice this. You see Jim Sedanis's work there, and Sapolsky and Pascal Boyer. And we're going to finish this up by looking at this study from Rauch and Hopcraft. So this is a quote from their study. Prison is, needless to say, an effective way of removing them, meaning black men, from the mating arena. It's also a way of permanently reducing their attractiveness as mates, because ex-convicts are severely compromised in terms of their ability to garner the resources necessary to provide for their mates and offspring. When men compete against each other, it's their status they tend to want to go after, to restrict and reduce them. Well, dominant group males are able to create coalitions, utilize cultural scripts, and social institutions in ways that tilt the competition in their favor. So that's what I've got highlighted in there: the structural power, political, legal, economic, all resting on a cultural dominance foundation. So they've got the power to do that to the outgroups who they feel threatened by. So this human behavior pattern creates inequality between groups by evolved design. We have evolved to be effective competitors by promoting our own fortunes and by undermining the fortunes of our rivals.
Now, if I put this in the scientific language of evolutionary psychology, from two of the grandmasters and founders of evolutionary psychology, Martin Daly and Margot Wilson, in their classic book called Sex, Evolution, and Behavior, they stated, top males keep other males down, underdeveloped, out of circulation, and out of the breeding population. Now, across the animal world, it is a common phenomenon for top males to work to keep other males of their species down as a useful sexual strategy to outcompete them. Humans are not excluded from this practice. We do it, we do it everywhere. If you are the dominant race, but you feel this way about the subordinate race, how hard are you going to try to give them social equality and remove a big advantage you have over them? If you give this rival tribe social equality, their physical advantages create an unequal situation between you. Your tribe now no longer has a social advantage over them because their physical abilities have a positive influence on how people are perceived and treated socially. So if there's no stigma, if there's no negative stereotypes on black men, and now they have a great social reputation, along with being perceived as being more strongly physically masculine, well, that will bestow upon them what big white guys have. Big white guys are perceived not as a threat, they're perceived as having status, perceived as being leaders, and so on. So they would be creating an unequal situation between us because the whole world perceives us as already having higher levels of masculinity. So when you add social equality, socially equal, but physically not perceived as being equal. So logically speaking, the evolutionary reasoning would say, these black guys now, they're going to have the selective social advantage over white men and the selective sexual advantage over white men. So, be honest, what group of men, regardless of white men, no group of men, black men, white men, Asian, Latino men, no group of men wants to give the other team an advantage over them with regard to status and being perceived as attractive. That's just not going to happen. Top males keep other males down. And modern day structural violence is how the population of men with structural and institutional power, that's how they do it. If they didn't, they would be giving up not just a selective social advantage, but a selective sexual advantage. And what group of men want to give up social and sexual advantages to the other team? So I'm going to let Brother Muzone from my favorite TV drama, The Wire, I'm going to let him explain what this situation really is.
No need to prolong this.
Nah, we got time.
You kill my man?
Nah, he rested. I'm saying, ain't you want to know?
Not particularly.
About a year ago, a boy named Bryant got here in Baltimore. Stuck and burned before he passed.
The game is the game.
Indeed.
Indeed. So let me know your thoughts and any questions on this one. I'm sure you're going to have questions on this one. Leave those questions in the comments and I'll get to them when I can.